phages that we have, the more likely we are to be able to target and treat a wider range of bacterial infections.
Today, I'm chatting with Esme Brinsden, the project coordinator for the Phage Collection Project, which is based in the UK. While completing her biology degree at the University of Southampton, Esme developed a particular interest in microbiology, specifically antimicrobial resistance and phages. As the Phage Collection Project's coordinator, Esme oversees the day-to-day operations of the initiative and provides support to the research team to ensure the goals of the project are achieved. Phage therapy is a topic that garners a lot of interest in our community, and I'm glad we have the chance to share more about this amazing project. Thank you so much for joining me today.
No, thank you for Melissa for having me. I'm looking forward to discussing the project more and also how we can hopefully use phage therapy to treat UTIs.
It's funny that this kind of came about because there was an article published about the project and multiple people in the community sent it to me. So I thought I should
Oh,
reach out and see if we can have a chat with you because there's so much interest in phage therapy as a non-antibiotic approach and
mm,
also just in the different mechanisms via which it might work for people with chronic or recurrent UTI. It would be great to start a little bit with your background so you can give us a bit of context for how you ended up working in this field.
yeah, of course. So, as you mentioned, I'm currently the project coordinator for the Phage Collection Project. But prior to this, I was studying for my undergraduate degree in biology at the University of Southampton. And it was during my degree that I kind of discovered my interest for microbiology, but particularly antimicrobial resistance and consequently phage therapy.
Hmm.
I think prior to starting my degree, I'd always heard about antimicrobial resistance, antibiotic resistance, but I don't think I quite realized the severity of the problem until I went to uni and actually studied it. And then I also learnt about phage therapy. This is something I'd never come across before. It was a
Hmm.
completely new concept to me. But I was kind of amazed about its kind of potential within therapeutics to treat these chronic and recurrent infections, but also, potentially bacterial infections as a whole. So it definitely kind of stimulated my interest. And in the end, I did my dissertation project on antimicrobial resistance. And yeah, it kind of led to my passion and where I've got to now today.
I can understand the fascination with phage therapy because when I first learned about it, I also thought, what a cool kind of concept. It's just
Yeah.
something that exists in the environment that we don't really think about, and then we can actually apply it to therapeutics. But let's take a step back to describe what a bacteriophage is so that we can have some context for the rest of the conversation.
Yeah, of course. So bacteriophages are basically bacterial viruses. So they're viruses which only infect and kill bacteria. So unlike viruses, which we typically hear about a lot, such as COVID, for example, phages do not infect our human cells. And that's why potentially, we're hoping to use them in therapeutics to treat these bacterial infections that we can all suffer from.
Where can phages be found?
Well, it's actually very interesting. Phages are actually the most abundant biological entity on this planet. So they can pretty much be found anywhere. Anywhere that you can find a bacteria, you're likely to find a phage. So this means we can find them in our environments, whether this be in the soil, rivers, lakes, like a puddle in our back garden. But we can also find them in our bodies, so they naturally exist in our gut. But you can also find them on your skin. So they're pretty much everywhere. We encounter them every single day.
What infections has phage therapy been used to treat so far?
Yeah, well, phage therapy isn't kind of a new concept. We've been using it actually for over 100 years now to treat bacterial infections. And over that time, it's been used for various infections, respiratory, orthopedic infections, pulmonary infections too, but also to treat things like diabetic foot ulcers is
Mhm.
another thing. And also, there's been cases where UTIs have been treated with phage therapy.
Are there particular types of infection that are most suited to phage therapy?
So we've seen kind of anecdotal evidence where phage therapy has been applied for various different infections, and we've seen that it's been able to successfully treat those infections. However, ultimately, what we do need is kind of more clinical trials to
Mhm.
robustly test the safety and efficacy of phage therapy to assess the best ways to treat different types of bacterial infections.
That makes sense. So, what kind of administration methods are there for phage therapy, and which might be the most useful for UTI?
So it kind of depends on the type of infection, really, on the administration route.
Hmm.
We've seen phage therapy be applied orally. It can also be applied topically, so directly onto the skin, for example, to treat maybe like a burn wound. But it can also be administered via a nebulizer, so it can be
Hmm.
inhaled. Typically for UTIs, we've seen phages be applied orally, but they can also be applied via intravesical administration.
Hmm.
So this is where the phage is directly applied to the bladder via a catheter.
How effective is phage therapy when compared to antibiotics?
We've seen multiple cases where phage therapy has been really successful at treating infections that patients are suffering from. But it's actually really, and one actually positive of phages compared to antibiotics is whilst bacteria can develop resistance to antibiotics, they can also develop resistance to phages.
Hmm.
But the positive thing with phages is that they can evolve and overcome the resistance mechanisms of the bacteria. So that's
Interesting.
one real advantage of
Hmm.
phages over antibiotics. And we kind of refer to it as this arms race. So the bacteria develop a resistance mechanism against the phage, and then, yeah, the phage can evolve and overcome that, and they're constantly battling one another. Um, but it's really important, I guess, to know and consider too that actually we've seen in these cases that phage therapy is actually really effective when
Hmm.
it's administered in combination with antibiotics.
Hmm.
So actually providing the two therapies to a patient together can be a really successful way to help clear a patient's infection.
Is that because the phages and the antibiotics at the same time mean that the bacteria can't evolve quickly enough to have resistance to both, or is there some other mechanism by which the phage therapy supports the antibiotics?
So yeah, it's exactly because, as I said, yeah, bacteria can be resistant to antibiotics and phages,
Yeah.
but it's unlikely that a bacteria can be resistant to both
Hmm.
at the same time. It almost takes too much energy for the cell to
Hmm.
become resistant to both. So therefore, when we apply both therapies together at the same time, we'll have maybe bacteria in causing the infection that are resistant to antibiotics, so can be successfully treated with the phage therapy,
Hmm.
but also vice versa. There may
Hmm.
be bacteria causing that infection which are resistant to the phages, but not the antibiotic. So providing it with both treatments kind of is like a double hit.
Yeah, makes
Is
sense.
able for us to successfully kind of try and eliminate all the bacteria causing the infection.
Well, that's a good segue to the next question, which is that if phages are everywhere that bacteria can be found, including in the bladder of those with recurrent or chronic UTI, why aren't those phages more effective at clearing the infection?
Well, so yeah, it's a very good point. Within kind of our bladder microbiome, phages naturally exist. They can also be found in that environment. The reason that we apply therapeutic phages to treat UTIs is because phages are extremely specific. So they normally infect and kill a small subset, so
Hmm.
strains of bacteria. So therefore, when we design a therapy, we can tailor the phages that we add to that therapy to specifically infect and kill the bacteria causing the infection
Right.
or causing the UTI. And we can also make sure that we apply the correct dosing and things to ensure that the phages can effectively infect and kill that bacteria and eliminate it.
That makes sense. Is there any research that shows whether phage therapy can do the same for bacteria within a biofilm in the bladder or within the cells of the bladder wall?
Of course, yeah. So there has been evidence to suggest, yeah, that phages do have
Hmm.
the ability to degrade and break down biofilms, specifically biofilms that may form in kind of a UTI
Hmm.
sense. This is because phages can produce a molecule known as an enzyme, which can kind of degrade and break down the biofilm. And then this makes the biofilm and the bacterial cells within the biofilm much more susceptible, not only to phage therapy, but also potentially to antibiotic treatment too, if that's being administered.
Yeah, that's a question that comes up a lot in the patient community because of this biofilm or chronic infection in
Yeah, of
UTI.
course.
And a lot of people in our patient community specifically probably have something like that going on in their bladder. And we know that antibiotics can't reach that bacteria very effectively, is why I think there's so much excitement amongst the patient community about phage therapy. So it would be interesting to see what comes out of future trials for UTI specifically. But do you think phage therapy could be used prophylactically or as a prevention measure after a specific trigger for UTI, like after sex or after dehydration, for instance?
I think it's definitely an interesting area. And I think, like we use antibiotics
Hmm.
prophylactically, there's definitely potential to use phages prophylactically too. Um, Something we do need to consider, though, obviously, with prophylactic antibiotic treatment, for example, we can see that bacteria then develop resistance to the
Yeah.
antibiotic. That's something potentially that might happen if we used phages
Hmm.
prophylactically. But ultimately, I think, yeah, it's a really interesting field, and hopefully it could be used. But ultimately, again, it's more research, more clinical trials, to assess truly kind of the safety and efficacy around that.
Once the clinical trials have been done, if they have shown that phage therapy is successful, do you think it could be considered a first-line treatment in the future?
Hopefully, that's, yeah, I think the hope. Obviously, there's, a lot of evidence to suggest the potential around phage
Hmm.
therapy, as we mentioned, for kind of targeting biofilms, but also as an alternative to antibiotic treatment. I mean, we're all very aware, particularly for UTIs, the problem that AMR causes. We get a
Hmm.
lot of these chronic and recurrent infections for UTIs. So, yes, hopefully, the more clinical trials that we start seeing, kind of more research and funding into this form of treatment, hopefully, we can see it be more routinely used to treat UTIs in the future.
That would be amazing. Are there already phages that are generally considered safe and are being used in over-the-counter products?
Yeah, so in the UK, currently phage therapy is only used on a compassionate use basis.
Hmm.
So this means when all therapies are not suitable for that patient, we can then, or kind of it's a last resort. So we
Hmm.
can then apply phage therapy. So over-the-counter products aren't available in the UK. However, if we look at countries like Georgia, they've been practicing phage therapy for many, many years now, and
Hmm.
it is a routine therapy out there. So you can go to your pharmacy and get a phage therapy over the counter. So whilst in the UK it's not available, it definitely is in other parts of the world.
It's really interesting. I know that some patients in our community have traveled to Georgia to access phage therapy. And a question that I will ask you later is about access to phage therapy in the UK, which you just mentioned briefly.
Yeah.
But I want to talk now about the Phage Collection Project. And so, first of all, what is the Phage Collection Project?
So the Phage Collection Project is a citizen science initiative which is based in Southampton, and it basically aims to advance phage therapy research with the help of citizen scientists, so members of the public that are keen to get involved in science and our research.
Why is it beneficial to include the public in a project like this?
There's so many benefits. Really, I would say there's quite a few. One of the reasons we wanted to establish the Phage Collection Project was first of all actually to increase awareness about antimicrobial resistance in phage therapy. As I said, I didn't come across phage therapy until
Hmm.
my second or third year at university. Typically, for many, it's an unheard concept, but it's an amazing concept, obviously. So we wanted to increase, I guess, awareness about antimicrobial resistance in phage therapy amongst the public.
Hmm.
But the other kind of two benefits, one of them is that citizen scientists can help to increase and expand the diversity of phages that we collect. So we run a phage sampling initiative where members of the public can collect a sample of water, post it back to our lab, and then we can try and isolate phages from those samples. And obviously, the more citizen scientists we have involved in the project, the more water samples we receive, and the greater diversity of phages we
Hmm.
then have in our biobank. And as I mentioned earlier on, phages are extremely specific. So they normally only target kind of a subset of bacterial species. So the more phages that we have, the more likely that we are to be able to target and treat a wider range of bacterial infections. So that's another benefit.
Hmm.
And then I would say kind of another big benefit is that we can learn from members of the public. Ultimately, all of us, potentially could use phage therapy in the
Hmm.
future. So it's really important that we design this experimental medicine around um, members of the public's views and attitudes and opinions about it so that we
Hmm.
can design it in a person-centered approach and make sure it's appropriate for ultimately people that may be using it in the future.
And that's very much aligned with our approach too. When we do these interviews, we ask for questions from the community, and everything we do, content wise or education wise, comes from community feedback. So I think it's really
Yeah.
important to incorporate those perspectives. But so you said you're collecting from water sources.
Yeah.
Are you collecting from anything else, like urine or feces?
So at the minute, our citizen sampling initiative is open to water samples, but
Hmm.
these can be a variety of water samples. It depends what citizens would like to collect for us. So they can
Hmm.
be environmental samples. They can be from a river, a pond, as I said, it could be a puddle on your back in your back garden,
Hmm.
but it could also be a sample of toilet water.
Right.
The reason that we say toilet water is because we actually find a lot of phages in wastewater.
Hmm.
And the reason for that is because wastewater typically contains a lot of pathogenic bacteria
Hmm.
responsible for causing lots of infections. So we're more likely to find phages in these environments that can infect and kill these pathogenic species of bacteria. So yeah, toilet water is definitely an option if that's yeah something of interest.
Well, it's definitely of interest. I imagine that the toilet water of people who have chronic or recurrent UTI might contain phages that are the most beneficial for UTI research. Is that the
Yeah.
case?
Well, this is something we really want to, yeah, establish is whether actually we can sample phages from toilet water from people with UTIs or even
Hmm.
maybe potentially urine too.
Hmm.
And it's a fascinating research area and it's something we're really interested to develop. So hopefully actually maybe that's something the Phage Collection Project and the Live UTI Free community can establish and we can get some research underway and going to assess,
Yeah, that would
yeah,
be
whether
amazing.
there's phages present in the urine that we can then use as a
Hmm.
therapeutic.
I think there'll be plenty of people in our community that would be willing to collect some toilet water for the project.
Amazing.
Once you get the phages from the citizen scientists, what kind of research are you doing on those phages?
Yeah, so once we've received the water samples, we isolate the phages from them, and then we conduct lots of different research on them. First of all, we test them against a variety of different bacterial strains, but also bacterial species
Mhm.
to assess the phages kind of host range to see which bacteria it's basically able to infect and kill. We can also sequence the phages, so we will look at their genetic material
Hmm.
to understand their genes and also helps us to understand their structure. But we can also view them under a TEM, so a transmission electron microscope. And this is really important for us to assess kind of the structure of the phage, what it may look like. And then we catalogue and biobank these samples,
Hmm.
and we then test them too against clinical isolates. So we can receive strains and species of bacteria from patients potentially who are suffering from UTIs. And yeah, we can then test our phages to see whether they could be applied therapeutically to treat that patient if relevant.
So is that linked to the ultimate goal of the project, the long-term potential treatment options for people?
Yeah, so ultimately, what we want to do is develop this comprehensive phage biobank with samples we receive not just from Southampton or the UK, but even internationally
Hmm.
to increase this diversity. And then, yes, the ultimate goal is that we then have this collection of phages, which can be used to treat infections right here and now, if the case arises, but also in the future when we hopefully see phage therapy being more routinely used across the world.
Yeah, it's such a great project. How can people get involved? We have a big network of patients, clinicians, and researchers. So how could each of those profiles get involved in the Phage Collection Project?
Yeah, so there's multiple different ways. So for members of the public or members of the community, they can get involved via two different methods. As I've discussed, there is our phage sampling initiative. So you can go onto our website and request one of our phage sampling kits.
Hmm.
You'll receive that in the post and you can collect a 50 millimeter sample of water and then post it back to our lab and we can see whether we find any phages in their sample. But the second way is that they can also take part in our willingness questionnaire. So, as I mentioned, we're really keen to understand the public's attitudes and willingness to accept phage therapy so that when it comes to clinical trials and actually designing these therapies, we can design them in a person-centered approach. So again, that's also available on our website, and individuals can give us their views and tell us what they think about this form of therapy. For researchers, they can get involved by contacting our biobank or us
Hmm.
as a project if they're interested in conducting their own phage research. So the biobank that we're establishing and growing, it's actually an open resource collection. So researchers, if there's a particular phage they're interested in, they can contact us and then we can send that phage out to them so they can conduct further research again,
Great.
hopefully to advance the
Hmm.
field. And then for clinicians, if they're just interested to learn more about phage therapy, again, they can get in contact with our project to learn a little bit more about what it is. But also, if they have a patient who they think may be suitable for phage therapy, again, they can reach out to us and then we can get them in contact with the necessary authorities to see whether phage therapy could be applied currently on this compassionate use basis.
That's really good to know. So we'll put some links in the video description so people can find the project and how to get involved. One question, if people send a water sample, do they find out whether you discover phages in their sample?
Yes, they do. So, yeah, once we've received your water sample, if we find a phage in your sample, you'll get a notification saying that we found your phage, and actually, you can have the opportunity to name your phage.
Oh, that's fun.
Yeah, if you find one, you can name it. We've had some interesting names, so
I can
yeah, we're looking
imagine.
forward. We're looking forward to receiving some more.
Have you published the names of the phages anywhere so people can have a look?
We're hoping to. So our kind of biobanking infrastructure is currently we've received a huge demand over the last few weeks. So yeah, we're hoping to get these all set up so that members of the public will hopefully be able to see their phage on our website too once we've isolated it.
Yeah, that's great. And it kind of adds to the experience. I think people are so interested in
Yeah,
the phages, and then knowing that they found something in the water they collected would be an extra incentive to
yeah,
continue with the
completely.
project.
Yeah.
So the last question, you just touched on it, access to phage therapy in the UK. Can you share
Mhm.
anything more about how patients can actively seek that out?
Yeah, so if you think you may be relevant for phage therapy, the best thing to do is to contact your infectious disease specialist or your GP and express an interest in phage therapy or to mention that you've heard about it and think it may
Hmm.
be relevant. They can then contact the necessary authorities, so the NHS, to see whether your case is suitable for phage therapy, and this can be reviewed and yeah, potentially then be administered to you if it's believed it's a suitable treatment.
So it is possible in the UK, but it's just through a regulatory pathway.
Yeah, so because it is a compassionate use therapy
Hmm.
and it is last resort, it has to be reviewed by a board to ensure that it is suitable for a patient and that there aren't alternative treatments that might be suitable first
Hmm.
before phage therapy is applied. Um, but again, hopefully, as you know, we've seen there's a real interest for phage therapy in the UK, I mean worldwide, but in the
Hmm.
UK too. So hopefully we start to see this push and shift, and as I said, more clinical trials and phage therapy eventually more routinely used.
Do you know of any phage therapy clinical trials coming up in the future or running right now?
Yeah, so the European Commission actually released a Horizon bid for a safety and efficacy trial on phage therapy. And the hope is that the successful awardee will start the clinical trial in 2026. So
Okay, very
very
soon.
soon. So
Yeah.
there's real hope that we can, yeah, start seeing big calls like this starting next year. But there are various clinical trials taking place across the world.
Hmm.
And as I said, even since I've been in this role for the past year, I've noticed a huge kind of shift in momentum and a real interest for this
Hmm.
therapy. So there's definitely hopes that we're going to start seeing more bids like this, yeah, in the future.
Yeah, it's really encouraging to see all this work happening. And we've also noticed the same. A lot more is happening in phage therapy in the last year or so than in
Yeah,
the 6 or 7 years before that. And I think that's encouraging for the patient community as well.
yeah.
And so I wanted to thank you so much for coming to share about the project. And hopefully we can get a bunch of people from the Live UTI free community to send in some samples.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me. And yeah, we look forward to receiving all your samples soon, hopefully.
Thanks so much for watching. I hope you found this expert video helpful. If you'd like to learn more about this or related topics, be sure to check out our other videos or head over to liveUTIfree.com for related articles. We'll drop some links in the video description. If you like what we're doing on this channel, you can support our work by hitting subscribe here on YouTube, and don't forget to tick the bell so you'll be notified of our future videos. Thanks again for watching, and until next time, keep asking questions and pushing for better solutions.